or 17 Echo AIT. I'll be starting us off on the discussion. We're talking about EW when it comes to building capability for the multi-purpose range, and kind of like how we've evolved from what we were doing back from initial in 2010 all the way to where we transitioned to the cyber branch around 2018. And kind of to preface it with the course, go to the next slide, McQueen. So just going through it, if you start looking at the overall course, like when I went to the 2-3 course at Fort Sill back in 2012, it was about 9 weeks. We ended up taking AIT and kind of branching out from the 2-3 course to where we built a 28-week and 4-day course for AIT to kind of give them the foundations with a couple of the talking points that I'm going to go through today. And then the rest of it, when it came to more of the staff function, NCO responsibilities and everything, we kind of pushed that into the ALC as we built that course also in 2018 to 2020. So when it comes through with the current training basics, we go through everything from RF theory, fundamentals. We teach math all the way from basic, arithmetic all the way into some physics, and we get into some calculus when you start getting into RF theory and communications and the way waveforms are actually produced. So understanding for them is the mathematics behind how is it actually produced to give them a general foundation. Going through from that, we also talk through and we're trying to build capability for the multi-purpose range to get more into the cellular and more technology-based. And kind of what are some of the green avenues that we would have to go after when it comes to communication. Following with that, we do teach the students the fundamentals of electronics. It's kind of a course, the 94 series, so our maintainers for the Army, we kind of break down some of their course material so our students and the greater EW population can understand how some of the equipment works and the way that it is and kind of how it produces the signals. So they learn basic electronics, AC, DC circuitry. They also get into some microwave communications aspects, how those actually function and how the waveform is actually produced. And then we go after that, taking a lot of the equipment that we have in the course, we start getting into teaching them their actual like ES and electronic support activities. How do we DF? How do we look at the different signals that we have, demodulization when it comes to like FM, to kind of show them what it is and how they'll be able to continue on as they get out into the operational force with other capabilities. So we kind of keep it system agnostic to where we do have capabilities in the school that we are teaching the general concepts of what it is, but the overall electronic warfare and how the field is what we're trying to get them under. We also introduce software-defined radio into the course to where they actually do some Python programming, very basic, and trying to get them to understand what a software-defined radio is and how the application for a lot of equipment that they will be seeing later on into the future. When it comes to that, they have a couple of building projects that they do. They'll make a microwave antenna, they'll make a microwave repeater, they'll make a basic AM/FM receiver. They program everything they need to do to send and receive. We also use some hack RFs to where they can get after some of the EA, to where they can actually start seeing what it does to just a bunch of different pieces of smaller equipment, whether it's an RC car or something like that, so they can show the fundamentals of how on a smaller scale is used. And with the EW constraints that we have, based off of everything that we're doing inside of the course, a lot of it has to do with the proliferation and the amount that we have. We went from training, I think it was 6 classes every year annually. We produced probably about 585 EW soldiers between 2010 to 2018. We've already produced almost 600 AIT students in a little over 29 months. So just the capacity of being able to train the amount of students that we need to between AIT and ALC. And then with the power levels, Fort Gordon is generally a smaller installation. We are using a lot of the outdoor training areas, which gets into why we're trying to build the multi-purpose training range. out in the TAs to kind of expand the capability of what we have so we can get a bigger footprint to handle EW. And then, McQueen, if you want to start.
So my name is Master McQueen. Myself and Major Fields are responsible for all the initial entry training for the 17 Echo electronic warfare soldiers, as well as the 17 Charlie cyber warfare soldiers. To caveat on what Master Sergeant Westerfield was talking about, we did a lot. We noticed early on that electronic warfare needed to change from planners and integrators to executors. So we did that. We started that change with the courseware, giving that foundational knowledge to be able to go out and apply this rather than relying on other people to figure out the ones and zeros. The next step behind that is giving them a place to actually be able to train. Currently, our training range is about 3 acres, which means when we throw up a target, you can generally see where that target is, and it kind of takes away the challenge of direction finding as well as filtering out targets in a dense environment. So with that, we've gotten the project put in for around Palm 28, Palm 29 to get the infrastructure built that's going to replicate a small town. Some of the other things we're doing is we're getting a very diverse mix of building material in the town so that we can replicate things like different ways that RF refracts. We noticed a lot of that in Iraq, that what we did depended a lot on where we were. The other piece of that is we noticed that home station training and capabilities out at the units were lacking being able to unify everyone with annual training and preparing them for near-peer adversaries. So with that, we had to look at how do we take the soldiers out of AIT. Given the curriculum change, how do we equip them and help them to see what they need to see on a battlefield before they actually get to their unit so that they can start shaping their requirements as well. With that, we've looked at the main town, but the training area as a whole is going to cover about 60 acres out in the training area. So although the town's going to be an incredible benefit to us, it's going to also give soldiers the ability to tactically move as they would in maneuver forces to be able to understand what's the importance. Simultaneously, we're currently looking at a lot of different options for how we replicate that dense urban environment. One of the biggest challenges behind that is there are a lot of systems that will do that, but we don't need all of that stuff to propagate from one location. We need a lot of different things propagating from different places so that we can mask things not just from a spectrum standpoint, but from a geographic standpoint. Also, one of the benefits behind the training range that we're doing is we're going to have about 88 pairs of fiber, which will allow us to tie into the cyber school training network. What that will allow us to do once we get established is start leveraging what EW support to cyber looks like and what cyber support to electronic warfare looks like, and how do we help each other be more productive and beneficial in our approaches. It is our belief also that this will kind of help shape a little bit more about how cyber is going to work in a maneuver type element, or how they can be more beneficial in other places, leveraging EW and cyber together. Lastly, for the training range, one of the big things that we deal with on Fort Gordon is being in a small place. We have ALC, we have SLC, we have the warrant officer courses, we have the basic officer leader courses. So trying to get everyone out in a particular area is a tremendous challenge. We often have people jam while other people are trying to direction find. It creates some unique experiences. But by and large, we're really excited about what's being done out there between not just electronic warfare, but the partnership between electronic warfare and cyber. With that, I will turn it over to our cyber expert.
Good afternoon. My name is Jay Walker. I am the lead technology officer for the cyber school, and I manage the cyber school training environment, which houses our currently our current virtual training area, which is our OpenStack environment that we stood up, I want to say back in 2014. So the whole point of us standing up our own virtual training environment and not leveraging anybody else's was, one, at the time when we stood it up, we needed to have an environment that was scalable, flexible, and sustainable, and that would be able to accommodate all the training and practical exercises that the students would be doing. So with that being said, the fact that we were able to take our own homegrown virtual capability and make it to what it is now, to where we're putting roughly, I want to say, between 2,000 to 3,000 students a year through cyber school. But the fact is that cyber school is not in the business of maintaining its own virtual infrastructure. So we're trying to look at getting away from maintaining our own environment. So with that being said, now with the persistent cyber training environment, aka PCTE, and I wish I had my slides up, so I'm going off of pretty much nothing on this one. So with PCTE coming around the curve, we've been mandated by U.S. Cybercom as the DoD executive agent for advanced cyber training to host all cyber training on PCTE and move away from what we're on now. And also in regards to the Army's reduction on data centers, that's another reason why we're trying to get after what we're trying to get after. So to get after PCTE, a lot of us are already tracking what the current issues are now with PCTE. The main issue is capacity. Every service branch's cyber force is using its own allocated piece of the pie for PCTE. So where does cyber school of the CCOE fit into that piece of the Army's pie? We could try to squeeze a little bit out of the unclassed PCTE allocation pool, but that's the most utilized. The TS portion of PCTE is underutilized. So to get after moving from our VTA, our current OpenStack environment, to PCTE and getting a footprint on PCTE, especially getting after General Nakasoni's vision to build an advanced operations course, we've already started with getting the Joint Information Operations Range, the JIAR node, stood up in one of our facilities, which currently it's a limited footprint, but it allows us to start getting a foothold on TS PCTE, And then once we're good with AOC, the Advanced Operations course, then we're going to look into moving into the additional tool developer, exploitation analyst, all the U.S. Cybercom sponsored courses. And then as far as for the individual training, we'll look at gradually moving that content over little by little. The easier way for us to do that, being that we use courseware as code, which is a framework that we use for storing all content as well as infrastructure code in our version control system, which we use GitLab. So in order for us to take our content that is in GitLab, which feeds into our VTA right now, but instead of going to VTA, go to PCTE, we have to make sure that PCTE PM is tracking that we need to make sure that that requirement is a reality, because at the time it wasn't. Courseware as code at the time wasn't a thing with PCTE. They're working on it right now, but as we continue to push requirements for how we do business now into PCTE, then they're going to make sure that PCTE is able to accommodate how we do business to get us off of our VTA. And pending any questions, that's all I have. Over.
All right, hey, so at this time, we would like to open it up if anyone has questions or wants us to talk about anything in a little bit more detail. Absolutely. So I started in electronic warfare. I transitioned from field artillery in 2011. In 2011, electronic warfare was planners and integrators of other people's capabilities. But what we found in maneuver forces was that we had to respond very quickly. We had to be able to execute when the commander wanted to, which really did not work out for requesting joint capabilities on a very specific timeline. At the same time, maneuver forces often ended up moving sooner than the mission was planned or later than the mission was planned, meaning that those capabilities were not there. So electronic warfare had the ability to support the operation, but it never had the ability to shape the operation. And we found that Big Army also agreed with us that those forces in electronic warfare needed to be able to shape the operation along with the rest of the domains in time and space as that commander needs to be able to do. Now, that required us to go back to the drawing board and figure out, if you look at certain aircraft capabilities, these officers often go through training for 2 years. And I don't think anybody in the room could actually carry all of the books that they have to go through. So how do we take that foundational knowledge, what is the core of their knowledge that they need to be able to conduct electronic attack? We began to reshape the course in order to be able to provide them that foundational knowledge. And the other piece is we deal with adversaries who are ever-changing and technology that is ever-changing as fast as can be. One of the things that we saw with software-defined radios is that many people are using cutting-edge technology with software-defined radios as the backbone. So rather than trying to keep up with every single piece of technology, it was easier to integrate the core of software-defined radios into their training, and with a little bit of work and analysis, they could expand on that knowledge and understand different things that were emerging. Additionally, we looked at, what do the soldiers need based on the majority of the locations that they're in. As we started doing this, we found that we have gotten away from a lot of common practices, sticking to reporting mechanisms, varying communication mediums, understanding what communication mediums are happening at different times throughout the battle. And so we also found that there was a lot of problematic for the comforts that we've gotten with technology over the years. And we've learned that we need to be able to see ourselves on the spectrum, on the battlefield, understand based on where we are in the mission, where should our spectrum be looking and what should it look like. Currently, we don't have a one-stop solution for that at this time, but the importance is definitely felt by our most senior leaders, and we're working to find what that looks like right now at the Schoolhouse so that we can start helping to inform some of the things that we're able to affect.
Sean Beauvais, Office Chief of Cyber. I hear a lot in the news about unmanned aerial aircraft, UAS, counter-UAS. Can you talk about any partnerships, any outreach you're doing from that perspective, or anything you're doing at the Schoolhouse from a curriculum or the range standpoint in the UAS arena?
Particularly in the counter small UAS, we're working with the Fire Center of Excellence at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. They're standing up the Joint Counter Small UAS University. We've accompanied them throughout Europe and Kuwait in places where they're currently experimenting with training. They've gotten their hands on some of the FS lids, fixed site systems that are targeting counter small UAS. We've seen one unit that was very hesitant to pull the trigger. We've seen another unit where they delegated that authority down to a much lower echelon, and they're doing great things with those. It's important for us because we're helping to make sure that as people who are not electronic warfare are starting to affect these systems, we're trying to make sure that they understand the foundational knowledges so that they can make the best decisions possible. These FS lids have the capability of affecting GPS, and so that's obviously something you want to make sure you're very careful about. So we've been working with them, helping them to develop their curriculum, lessons learned, best practices. At the same time, we're being able to see where these things are being trained, how the soldiers are responding to them, how the commanders are feeling about them, how they look. And we're also getting back to foundational basics like ensuring the FS lids are placed in the most optimal area so that there's no gaps in coverage. And the tactics that they're learning as they're starting to go through this course is helping feed us as far as what works best and what does not. So we will I think just last week I got the approval for some of our first drones to get brought in, so they should be purchased probably this week, and that will definitely be pushed out as we get out to the training area, the new multi-purpose training range. That's one of the first things that we're going to look at, how that incorporates into the FTXs, the field training exercises.
Thank you.
Bill Burton from KPSC. The question I have is, as an EW soldier in your curriculum, how much is done for EA versus ES?
So your question, sir, is how much do we break down a course pretty much to the tenets of EW, correct, for EA, ES, and EP? So think of it as structure for grade plate wise. So for AIT, we're mostly worried about the fundamentals and ES. So like think of it as a 60-40 split. They're still understanding, we're doing direction finding, how to identify a signal, how to do a site survey, what do we look like, what does our adversary look like? And then from there, they understand what EP is procedural-wise, and then EA, the concepts and what doctrine says and how to implement some of the EA. Take it to ALC. So you're looking at your staff sergeants and above. They're primarily looking at ES, 50%, and then EA. They're out doing operational, dealing with the operational environment. They're out with the soldiers. They're the tactical edge of the battlefield when it comes to EW. SLC, think of it the opposite way. They're doing majority EP, procedural, what's doctrine actually stand for, how do you get those into the planning process, how do you implement those. For the warrant officers, it's a grab bag of everything because they're rewriting a lot of their course material right now to get into a little bit more specifics and that technical aspect of what they want. I don't know what it really looks like right now, but we got the right people in the right job. And then for the officers, wave tops when it comes to them and just generally how do they staff process-wise. We've also been getting in the 17 Bravo course with a lot more joint in the environment for them to kind of understand the lingo when it goes to it. So did I answer your question? I'll follow.
Please explain ES, EA,
Oh, so electronic support. Yeah, so electronic support, think of it as direction finding, identifying a signal. Like you're doing support electronically. If you think of it as a concept of what SIGINT is, back it off from pretty much demodularization, anything encryption-wise. We're literally looking at amplitude, overall signal. EA, there's a bunch of different techniques that you can use, but it's electronic attack. So you're emitting something, and there's different ways to do it. Either, you can broad spectrum jam, you can spot jam. There's a couple other different ways. There's some more advanced techniques that you can get to. And then EP, think of it as electronic protection. So we're looking at protecting our friendly assets against the enemy. So whether it's a procedural aspect, a policy, direction, anything like that. That's generally the tenets of what electromagnetic warfare is.
So one of the things also that we noticed through the training centers was that soldiers got in the mindset of being locked if we're doing a defensive, we're doing support, if we're doing an offensive, we're doing attack. What they lacked in that was actually understanding the enemy, right? Understanding what the enemy was doing at that time. So out of the 70% they did electronic attack, probably only about 10 to 15 was being beneficial because it wasn't tied to intelligence. It wasn't tied with understanding when the enemy's talking, how crucial those things are. So we teach these things now, but as they go through ALC, SLC, they start to understand more rather than jamming all the time, ensuring that the jamming they do is very strategic and has a good chance of measures of effectiveness and measures of performance.
William from Higher Echelon. Can you speak a little bit to how the course design and maybe even the design of range is being influenced by lessons from the Ukraine War, particularly around the hybrid commercial and military channels of communication for the Indians there?
Absolutely. One of the things that we find with Ukraine is we see that Russia is doing jamming. It kind of goes back to what I was saying a moment ago. They're doing jamming, but they're not tying that to key times in their operation. So at the same time, it's not being coordinated. So you have friendly forces that are getting jammed by their own friendly forces, and the jamming is not happening at the right time to be effective. So one of the biggest things is we provide the curriculum, we provide them with a very in-depth knowledge of databases to help kick off creating an enemy electronic order of battle so that they can kind of understand what they're looking at. In addition to that, on the reverse side, we create our friendly electronic order of battle so that we're able to kind of deconflict and ensure what we're doing. On the electronic protection side, we're looking at our own friendly forces to ensure that, one, we're practicing good emissions control, but two, to find those people who are, we all know somebody's going to go out there and use their own frequency that's not allocated, right? So we're trying to look for those anomalies and make sure that we're tracking what's legitimate on the spectrum. With the drone piece, we're looking at, there's a lot of different ways to approach this, right? If we decide to go after every single drone that's in the air, we're giving away our position every time we do that. So what we're looking at right now is trying to create quick identification cards or some type of medium so that soldiers on the ground can start creating reports, sending it back to their electronic warfare cells to make a very quick determination on whether the intel gain loss is worth giving away our positions. Part of that depends on identifying payloads attached to those drone systems. One of the things that we've always done in electronic warfare is having, every time we jam, we have measures of effects and measures of performance. And we always try to line up SIGINT assets to support our jamming to make sure that what we're doing is actually effective. And if not, we always have our alternate and contingency plans before we ever go jamming. That way we can shift based on that.
Can you talk a little bit about the Schoolhouse in particular? How is it influencing when we're looking at the range, when we're looking at field exercise training environment?
Okay. Yeah. So one of the things we're doing, although we're building the town, we have about 60 acres out there, and at one point that town will actually be an adversary, and the students will have to actually move tactically around that area. The enemy will be able to deploy drones. They'll be able to jam the friendly forces. There will be obstacles out there on the range that increase the likelihood of them giving away their position. And everything that the soldiers will have on the training range for their final FTX, the enemy will have the exact same thing. So they're going to have to use all of their skills to be able to do that. Right now, we're looking at, specifically as we're talking about Ukraine, we're looking a little bit more to the ALC and the SLC as far as coordination and tactics, as well as rapidly identifying some of the effects on the battlefield. The other piece that we're looking at is, as we're looking at planning from a protection standpoint, we're looking at what we think the enemy will do on the intelligence side, and we're assuming that the enemy is going to try to align some of their electronic capabilities on some of those key moments on the battlefield. Right now, we don't know how effective that's going to be, but we're starting to try to put some of those philosophies into the curriculum for SLC. So the ALC just got a revamp, and we're not going to be able to go too crazy with what we do with that. But the SLC will be the next course to kind of get a redesign as we do the AIT and the ALC. And we're definitely looking at predictive analysis of the enemy as we move forward with that.
Probably tell from looking at me, I was experienced and learned a lot of hard lessons, and my friends learned a lot of hard lessons when they seriously opened the National Training Center and they did Op 4 and all that sort of stuff. It really raised the quality of training before you even got into the center. How long will it be until we can do the same sort of thing
Are you talking about from well, I'll approach this from a few different ways. As far as capability, we're absolutely capable of that. We all know that with any resource and asset comes a dollar sign. So some of that will depend on, what funding can be brought to different installations. What we're doing in the training range now is we're trying to look at solutions to create target sets like we're doing. And I think that's going to be the foundation of it, going after our enemies right now. On the other side, with the ability to shut down the units like we do at the national training centers, there comes a tremendous amount of risk as well, because we're targeting things that are used every day, not just in the military, but in the civilian infrastructure. So I can't speak to what that timeline would look like, but I know that's going to be something, if we're going to do it universally across the Army, that's probably going to be the biggest hurdle. All right, if there are no more questions, the three of us will be hanging around if you want to come ask us a few questions individually or anything else. We'll be here for a little bit, but we appreciate everybody coming out. And if you have some information for us that would be good information, we're always open to look at everything. So, thank you.